Hi, everyone. Welcome to the March 27th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, the focus is Gulfstream Park's Saturday card. The main event there is the Grade 1 Florida Derby, but the entire 14-race card is just stacked with really interesting stakes races, and Craig and I are going to handicap most of them. And Craig, how are you doing, and are you ready to get right into the racing? Because I think there's a lot to discuss this week.
There sure is. It's quite a card. I mean, this rivals a Belmont Stakes Day card and almost even a Breeders' Cup card, maybe not in quality, but from a betting perspective. So let's get right to it.
We're going to skip just a few of the stakes races. We weren't planning to discuss race 4, the Cutler Bay for the 3-year-olds. I know I personally didn't have a big opinion in that race against the favorites. So we're going to begin with race 6, and we'll just go through these, I think, in chronological order leading up to the main event, the Florida Derby. Race 6 is the Grade 3 Hal's Hope. This is a race that they elongated this year to go 2 turns, 1 mile and an eighth. I believe it was run at 1 mile in the past. And this, I thought, was one of the more interesting races to handicap on the card because there's no clear favorite in this race. You've got a few Todd Pletcher horses that might take some money, but I thought this was one where you could look for a bit of a price.
It is. This is a race where the pace projector predicts there's going to be a fast pace. It's not a surprise with the big field. And also when you have Bodie Express in the field, I think it's probably pretty much a certainty that there's going to be pace. The morning line favorite American Tattoo also adds a bit of speed, and as does Rare Form, a horse who pressured Bodie Express last time out. From a handicapping perspective for me, this one is pretty simple. It would be hard for me to go against Harvey Wallbanger in here, assuming he doesn't just get bet crazy. I really liked his race last time. He ran a big number. I think he got a 118. It shows as a 120 in my PPs. I assume he's getting some weight off. He has by far the best late pace rating in the field. He draws a good post, and he gets a 9 furlongs that he probably likes. So, well, I've never been a fan of his in the past. I really did like that effort last out, and I think he's where I'm going to start with my bets.
Yeah, this is a race where I just found it really difficult to trust anybody because you've got a few horses with one big performance, kind of like Harvey Wallbanger has, some horses who have form that would win this race, but it was form from last year, and the recent performances aren't so encouraging. I would put a horse like Bodie Express in that category. I thought Bodie Express personally could be the favorite in this race because he really did run well in some of his races earlier in the winter and going back to last fall. I don't know what happened last time in the Gulfstream Park Mile when he just got cooked in that early duel with Rare Form, who, as you said, he's back in this race, and it feels like those two have to hook up at some point on the front end here. We'll see if that creates enough pace for a horse like Harvey Wallbanger. I've got no problem with the notion that Harvey Wallbanger repeating his last race is going to make him really tough in here. I just didn't have a lot of faith that we're going to see that again from Harvey Wallbanger because he's been so inconsistent in the past, and also Corey Lanerie gave him just this perfect ride last time. They left the rail open. He just shot on through, saving all that ground. I think it would be tough for Dylan Davis to orchestrate a trip that was that perfect in this race. It just seems unlikely it's going to happen twice in a row, but I don't disagree that he does have the ability to win this race. I wanted to look for some others. I wasn't really enamored with a lot of the short prices like American Tattoo. He's just never been a horse that I've been a big fan of. I didn't think he was quite good enough to win this race. On the outside, Realm is a horse that I'm sure you know I've liked in the past. And I know he's not really a winning type, but he has run multiple speed figures that put him right in the mix. I think getting out to the 1 mile and an eighth as opposed to the 1 mile and a 16th last time is going to help Realm a little bit. So he's a horse I definitely want to use. But my top pick in this race is going to be the number 8, Sir Anthony. I kind of doubt we're going to get that 15-1 morning line on him because he looks a lot more logical than that to me. But Sir Anthony, I think if you parse his form from 2019, it's stronger than it might seem at first glance. I mean, first of all, he's not really a synthetic horse, so I don't care that much about his most recent race at Woodbine. And looking at his 3 dirt races prior to that, he ran a speed figure that could beat this field in the Cornhusker 4-back. After that, he just encountered an unfavorable pace setup in the West Virginia Governor's Cup. Pretty much the same thing in the Lucas Classic. I know that was a pace that is moderate on the TimeformUS PPs, but it was really dominated towards the front end. And Sir Anthony was one of the only horses that really closed in that race. He's coming off a bit of a layoff here, but I like that he's picking up Florent Giroux. Think he'll get a bit of pace to close into, and 9 furlongs seems like the perfect distance for him.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. He's actually our second-rated late pace horse. My only thing I'd say about Harvey Wallbanger is if he was a 5 or a 6-year-old, I would be much less inclined to take that big jump last time. But he's still a fairly young 4-year-old. He was just a March foal, so I almost expect them to run to that. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the morning lines. I don't see any way American Tattoo goes off the favorite. I don't even consider him a real contender in this field, to be honest. And I think it's a theme we're going to talk about. I'm not criticizing the morning line maker. I wouldn't even know where to start on some of these races. They all have big fields. They're all deep in contention, but I just saw a lot of morning lines that I thought were pretty shaky. But given the conditions that we're under, I think it's, you could speak more to this than I could as the guy who does the morning lines for NYRA, but I just found a lot of them a little questionable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like to go out on a limb and criticize morning lines too much, given that I take a lot of that criticism incoming most of the time in New York when I get it wrong. But look, I probably wouldn't want the job at Gulfstream, especially for days like this. A lot of these races are just insanely tough, and there are so many of them packed onto one card. It just seems like a daunting job. In this particular race, I completely agree with you. I don't know. I saw this race being bet completely differently. I thought Bodie Express would be the favorite. I didn't like either Pletcher Horse, You're to Blame, or American Tattoo. I didn't see either one as really significant contenders here. So we'll see how they bet the race. Again, I picked Sir Anthony. I think I'll be half of that 15-1 price on the morning line, but I also think that would be a fair price if he's around 8-1. Let's move on to the Sanibel Island, which is the next race on that card, the 7th. This one is going a mile on the turf for the 3-year-old fillies. And this is a race where, unlike in the male version of this race, the Cutler Bay, I thought the favorites in this race looked a little bit vulnerable. I mean, you've got a horse like Cheermeister, who's going to take some money. She's coming off 2 straight victories where she won in gate-to-wire fashion. I think she's going to have a lot more trouble wiring this field because there's much more speed signed on. You've got a horse like Walk-in Marrakesh who could take some money. She's lost a couple of close decisions in her last 2 starts with pretty good trips. And a horse that's really intriguing in here that I think you have to have an opinion about is the number 9 Seducer, who was so impressive winning her maiden race in her debut at Aqueduct last November. But have to remember that was a time at Aqueduct when the rails had just come down. They were set at 0 feet. And any horse racing down on the inside seemed to have a significant advantage. And she was riding that rail the entire way, setting a moderate pace. So I do think she has ability. I just wonder if that performance is not quite as strong as it seems.
Yeah, this is another race where we have the pace likely to be fast according to the pace projector. I don't really have any problems with that. It looks that way to me as well. I'm against morning line favorite Cheermeister in here. She doesn't figure to lead on the pace projector, and if she does, she's going to have to work awfully hard to get it. So at a short price, I'm not interested in her. Seducer is the one I started with just because of that 108 TimeformUS speed figure she ran last time. That is a very big number for a 2-year-old filly. I don't remember the Breeders' Cup juvenile fillies number off the top of my head, but I'm sure it wasn't a 108. It was something below that. And when you look through the chart of the TimeformUS PPs, I think it is a race that has come back strong. Obviously, Harvey's Little Goyle came out of that race and moved the dirt, but there's been some other good performances. So I think the number is legitimate, but it is one of those where you say, I think she did have an advantage on the course. So for her, it's just going to come down to odds. I think she's 8-1 on the morning line. If she went off anywhere near there or higher somehow, but I don't think that's going to happen, I'd take a shot with her. But I suspect she's going to get bet off of that number. I haven't looked at what the buyer is or other speed figures, but I would guess it's probably pretty high on those as well. So the horse I actually wound up landing on is one that's a bit of a longer price, and that's number 11, Highland Glory for Barclay Tagg. Even though her number didn't come back big last time, she only got a 98 in her first turf try. She actually overcame, which was a pretty tepid piece in that race. We have some of the fractions coated in blue, and I just really liked what I saw visually, and she looks like the type of filly who is definitely going to improve her speed figure this time and possibly could do so enough to win the race.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Highland Glory, I liked her last race. She's got this big turf pedigree. She's actually a full sister to one of my favorite turf horses from the past couple of years, Highland Sky. So I think the sky is the limit with her ascending to stakes races on the turf. And frankly, she didn't run that much slower than Seducer in her first turf start. So I think there is a reason to believe that she can take a step forward here. I'm fine with that opinion. I do think this is the kind of race where you can take a shot with a bit of a price. And I'm doing that probably with an even crazier horse. I was interested in the number 12, Air of Light. The negatives with Air of Light are pretty glaring. She's showing up close to the pace in the pace projector. And as you said, it's projected to be a pretty fast pace. So maybe that just works against her. Maybe I'm putting forth a bad opinion here just because of that fact alone. I don't think that Air of Light is definitely a horse that needs the lead, though. And I think the fact that she's drawn outside, I don't think they're going to be quite that aggressive. We'll see how they actually ride the race. But the reason that I'm interested in Air of Light here is because she's getting on the turf. And I know that her dirt form looks pretty uninspiring at first glance, but she really is bred to do better on the turf. She's by the Factor, and the Factor is really turning into a pretty nice turf sire. He wins with 14% of his turf runners overall. We've seen plenty of his progeny ascend to the graded stakes level on the turf. Her dam La Song, she was a horse that ran on all surfaces. She really was best on turf and synthetic. She's produced one other foal who didn't try the turf, but who was a pretty fast dirt sprinter. There is some turf in the second generation. And what I really like about this horse is, well, two things. Her maiden victory back on September 13th at Churchill Downs, it was on the dirt, and she showed she had some ability that day because that's come back as a really strong race. Beautiful Trauma, who was second, returned and won by like 16 lengths at the fairgrounds with a gigantic speed figure. Tempers Rising was third that day. She subsequently graded stakes placed. A number of horses that finished behind those have come back and run faster speed figures in their subsequent starts. Now, I know Air of Light completely fell apart after that, but sometimes horses that aren't really meant to run on the dirt they run well the first couple times, then they just fall apart until they get that surface switch. And it's interesting to me that Norm Cassie has been working this filly on the turf for like 2 months straight. Her drills down there at Palm Meadows seem pretty impressive, plenty of fast times, a number of them in company. I watched a few on XBTV. She's done them really easily. She's got this really nice turf stride on her. And I don't know if the trip's going to work out, but she's going to be a gigantic price in this race. And I just feel like she's one who has a good chance to outrun her odds.
Hey, you know me, I'm never going to try to talk somebody off a 20-1 shot, and I actually like your argument in here. The one thing I did want to add is when I do like a horse moving from dirt to turf like you do in this spot, I generally look for horses that haven't been running well on dirt. For one, because they offer value, and two, I just think there's a much bigger chance they're going to wake up than a horse who's actually already running well on dirt and moves over. To me, those kind of horses disappoint more often than not. So interesting argument, and this is going to be a fun race to bet.
Next race on that Gulfstream Park Saturday card is the 8th race. It's the Sir Shackleton going 7 furlongs for the older horses. And Craig, I've got to say, for a sprint stakes race on the dirt, there's very little speed in this field. I know the pace projector is not quite predicting a situation favoring the early leader, although it is worth pointing out the number 11 Frosted Grace is probably going to scratch because I believe he ran yesterday at Gulfstream. So that takes even more speed out of this race. And I mean, there are plenty of contenders in this race, but so many of them have that same closing running style.
Yeah, it is an interesting race. When you see a horse like Yorkton given a clear lead in a sprint, a horse who's primarily run on synthetics and turf, where we don't give as much credit for on our early pace ratings, there isn't a whole lot of speed. So I'm almost surprised this one doesn't have I didn't look close enough to see why, but it doesn't have the favors on or near the lead label or no speed even. But that said, I mean, I think if you're handicapping this race, you almost have to start with Vekoma, the winner of last year's Bluegrass Stakes. I found it interesting that he is the top TimeformUS power pick. That's kind of unusual for a 3-year-old returning in a stakes race that hasn't run in almost a year because, it's still those picks are based on speed figures and his was done a long time ago. But it also tells me it's just not a very strong field in here. Vekoma is a horse who proved he can run well fresh. He came right out of the box for George Weaver, won easily first time out, jumped right up and won the Nashua. Then he took some time off before the Fountain of Youth last year. And though he didn't win that day, I thought he ran a very good race before rebounding to win the Bluegrass. So for me, I think the race clearly goes through him. I think he's the most talented horse in here. I think it's a pipe dream to think we would get anything near that 9-2 morning line that he's listed on just based on reputation and the fact that his last running line is the Kentucky Derby, which people tend to gravitate to. And I think he's the horse to beat. And I'm not sure who I'd want to go against him with, given what I see in the rest of the past performances.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of Vekoma is that he was running almost fast enough to win a race like this as a 2-year-old. I mean, his first couple of starts really pointed it out as one of the best, if not the best, of his generation as a 2-year-old. I mean, I know those were one-turn races, but this is a sprint too, and I think they're just getting back to what Vekoma's really always been cut out to do. I think you and I both never thought he was a 1.25 mile horse, so I think 7 furlongs to a mile seems like the perfect distance for him. The one knock on Vekoma, and I've got nothing to add to what you said about him, he is the horse to beat in this race. The one knock, if I have one, is that George Weaver's record off layoffs isn't ideal. I looked it up in Formulator over the past 5 years, over 6 months or more in dirt sprints. George Weaver's 5 for 40, 13%. The ROI is less than $1. So that's a negative, but I'm sure that he's got Vekoma ready to run a top effort here, given that he's returning in a stakes race. So I do think he's the horse to beat. The other horse that's a short price on the morning line is the number 3 Last Judgment. And I will say I did like Last Judgment's return race at Gulfstream back in February. He broke from the rail that day, was off a bit slowly, got shuffled back thereafter. I don't think that John Velasquez anticipated that he was going to be that far back in the early going, but he put him under a hard drive on the turn. He made this big looping move. It was a really visually impressive performance. He's going to have to run faster to win this race. But again, I've got a negative trainer stat for him on Todd Pletcher. This one actually surprised me quite a bit. Over the past 5 years, second off a layoff of 6 months or more, with horses that won their return from the layoff and now are racing second off a layoff in dirt sprints. Top Pletcher's 1 for 23 with a 15-cent ROI. So that says that these horses that win off the bench for Todd usually come back in tougher spots and don't perform to expectations. So I'm a little bit skeptical of Last Judgment. The one horse I would take a shot with, maybe against these two, is the number 10, He Hate Me. This is a horse that has some back speed figures that do put him in the mix here. He's got to get the 7 furlongs, which is a bit of a concern because he's been more of a 6 furlong specialist recently, but he's the kind of horse that finishes up his races pretty well. I'm not going to fault him for losing to Killybegg's Captain last time because I really do think that horse is in graded stakes form right now, even though he's been running in more listed type stakes races, and just feel like He Hate Me is going to get the jump on a lot of the deeper closers in this race. So if Vekoma doesn't show up for whatever reason, I think He Hate Me is the best alternative.
That I just went when I looked in the most likely horses to beat him are horses like Last Judgment and He Hate Me. It was kind of hard to get excited for me, for anybody in here. So mostly, like I said, I doubt we'll get anything like that 9-2 on Vekoma. So probably just going to be a watch race for me and see how he comes back, because the older horse division could certainly use some depth.
Moving on to race 9, which is the Sand Springs, again going a mile on the turf now for the fillies and mares. And I think the big story in this race is the return of Newspaper of Record. What are we going to get from this horse who was so good as a 2-year-old, really one of the best 2-year-old turf fillies that I think we've ever seen in this country, running the kind of speed figures that would really any 3-year-old would be envious of. She obviously did not take a step forward in her 3-year-old season. Arguably, she took a step backwards. She showed some tendencies during her races that are pretty undesirable, getting very headstrong, trying to run off in the early going. Rating tactics just completely backfired last time in the Belmont Oaks. She's coming back off the layoff here. What do you think we're going to get from her?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? I mean, I think the race just has to go through her. It is one we have labeled as fast on the pace projector, like a lot of races, largely due to the big fields. And I think everybody, when they handicap this race, kind of has to make the decision: are you going to get the 2018 version or the 2019 version of Newspaper of Record? For me, it just comes down to Chad Brown. It's hard to think that he doesn't think this filly's back in really good form. The fact that she shows up in the race, I mean, she certainly has value. If they wanted to breed her, they could do it just off of her 2-year-old record. So I don't think she could have caught a much easier field than this. There's not there's not really any graded stakes horses in this field. So for me, It's, I mean, I hate to say it. I know it's a race show where we like to talk about betting, but it's probably one I'm just going to watch and see how she does. I mean, it's always possible if some horse I thought should be the second or third choice winds up 15 or 20 to 1, that I take a flyer in here. But just given the strength of the field, she's one that I'm probably not going to go against, given that she's trained by Chad Brown, and he returns horses off a layoff like this all the time and does very well with it. So I might look silly if she, is headstrong again and runs off and gets beat at 4 to 5 or whatever she goes off at, but just not one I'm eager to take a big stand against.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that I'm a big fan of this filly. I was just so impressed by her 2-year-old season, and I'd love to see her get back to top form. Just as a fan of the game, I mean, you always want to see these top horses who have so much natural ability actually show it in the afternoons. I am concerned, though, mostly about the presence of the number 10 Jakarta, because this is a weird horse to be in this race. She's basically a 5-furlong turf sprinter that you have to think that the plan is going to be to go to the lead. And it's hard to see Newspaper of Record outrunning her to the front, assuming that Jakarta actually starts in this race. And it just concerns me because Newspaper of Record completely freaked out last time in the Belmont Oaks when she didn't make the lead. Now, that was a much slower pace, and I think if they could have done that race over again, they probably would have just sent her to the lead that day. Maybe she relaxes better if they're going quicker up front. Still, though, she's going to be an awfully short price, and this is the kind of horse that, even though I'm a fan of hers, I've just got to take a shot against her in this race from a wagering standpoint. Where do you go? I think the best option is the number 2, Zofel. We've talked about this filly quite a bit for her races at the fairgrounds this winter. I was really impressed by her race 2 back in the Pago Hop. I know that it says that she got some pace to close into that day, according to the TimeformUS pace figures. That was a race that was dominated on the front end, other than her late run by Elstown, who really took a big lead into the stretch. And Zofel was the only horse that made a big run from the back of the pack that day. So I don't want to put too much stock in the fact that the pace looked a little bit fast. And then last time out in that Alstall Memorial, that was that day when the fairgrounds turf course was really rail biased. Horses that rode the rail for much of their trips seemed to have a big advantage, as did the winner of that race. She's on the warpath before she angled out in the stretch. And Zofel was just out in the 4 to 5 path the entire way. She was closing widest of all in the stretch. She never had a fair shot that day. She's supposed to get a bit more pace to close into this time. And I just think this is a filly that has a bit more natural. She has more potential that I think her recent speed figures might indicate. And I'm hoping she can take that slight step forward here. The other horses that I would give just a look to are the number 7, Get Mother a Rose. I know I liked her last time, and she's going to be a much shorter price today, but I don't want to discount the Now horse. She earned a speed figure last time that puts her in the mix. She's going to get pace to close into again. So I don't want to just totally write her off, even though I made a score with her last time. And the number 6, La Signore, probably her best days are behind her, but I like her getting back to the mile distance. I thought a mile and 3/16 last time was just way too far for her. Again, she's probably not in the best form right now, but I would consider all 3 of these as potential alternatives to Newspaper of Record. We'll see which one's the best price, but I think Zofel does have the best chance of those.
I will say I like your alternatives a lot more than our top TimeformUS power pick, Valedictorian. I just want to mention that it's not often that we have a horse picked at a price on top that I just ignore them, but I think she's a horse that's all form. She hasn't been the same filly we saw, or mare, I guess she hasn't been the same mare that we saw last year, and she's the top pick in our past performances based on things she did, 6 and 7 months ago, and the race she came when she ran back in February in the Honey Fox didn't look anything like that horse I saw last year. So, like I said, I prefer your options to her, definitely.
Yeah, we've got the same take on Valedictorian. Looks like a tough pace situation for her as well. We're going to stick with that same class, the fillies and mares on the turf, but going a longer distance in the next race. That's the 10th, the Grade 3 Orchid, going 1 mile and 3/8. And the 2 likely favorites are drawn towards the center of the field, the number 5, Gentle Ruler, and the number 6, Mean Mary. Personally, I'd expect Mean Mary to be a significant favorite in this race, just because people are going to see that she was so impressive last time in that La Prévoyante. She had everything go her way that day, though, because nobody had any kind of speed, and they really couldn't press her for the front end. And she essentially just got to sprint the last half mile that day. Not really a true test of stamina. This time, there could be a bit more speed in this race. You've got Bo Bell, who could show a bit of speed, but especially the number 12, Elizabeth Way. You've got to think Paco Lopez is going to try to be a little aggressive, given that she won in wire-to-wire fashion last time. So I think Mean Mary has talent, and she's good enough to win this race. She's just going to face a sterner test this time.
I actually like her a bit in here. I'm not sure the others are really fast enough to keep up with her if she's intent on getting the lead. It just kind of depends on how hard Paco Lopez wants to challenge her, in my opinion. If he really wants to go with her going a mile and 3/8, he probably does. He's an aggressive rider, but I expect her to run a good race. I do think this race comes down to the two favorites, Jenna Ruler and Mean Mary. Gentle Ruler has just been in awesome form. She's won 6 of her last 7. The distance obviously isn't going to be a problem. The question marks for me with her that she's coming off a 5-month layoff and she doesn't have a whole lot of early speed. And as somebody who watches almost every race run at Gulfstream every day, Gulfstream it's just not your typical turf course. I do think it is a little more speed friendly than a lot of other courses we see, particularly up in New York and on the East Coast, not so much out west, but or Keeneland, Churchill, it's just not as kind to late speed as some of those are. So I'm a little bit against her. And for that reason, even Mean Mary, she's obviously not going to offer a lot of value in here. But in horizontal, she's definitely going to be on my tickets and would probably be my top pick in here.
Yeah, I do think she's in some ways the most likely winner of this race, and I am going to pick against her here, but I do think she has quite a bit of ability, so I'm not going to be shocked if she pulls off the same feat and wires the field again. I echo all of your sentiments about Gentle Ruler. I've got those same questions, but I also really respect her 2019 form. She was just so good last year, and she seemed to always make her own good trips. Didn't matter if she was way off the pace or closer to it. She just always seemed to be right there at the finish of her races. So I think that both of them are going to run well. The alternative that I settled on at a better price is the number 7, Capta Creus. She gave Mean Mary a real run for her money 3 back in that optional claiming race, going a mile and an 1/8. Mean Mary looked like she had her put away at the 8th pole, but Capta Creus was really game to run after her at the end of that race. She earned a 1:14 TimeformUS speed figure, which frankly is not that much lower than the best number Mean Mary's ever run when she earned that last time. Capta Creus, I know that she was beaten a long way by Elizabeth Way in the very one most recently. I'd advise people to go back and watch Capta Creus's trip because nothing worked out for her. She was squeezed back at the start, so she was way too far back in the early going. Flavien Prat tried to launch this 4-wide run around the far turn. Just can't really do that in these Gulfstream turf races. As you said, speed is so dangerous, and that very one was just dominated towards the front end. Capta Creus does have much more tactical speed than she showed last time if she breaks cleanly here. And I do like that she handled the mile and 3/8 distance at Saratoga last summer. That's proven to be a pretty strong race that she was in because Romantic Pursuit is subsequently grade 3 stakes placed. Dynapassers turned out to be a good horse too. So I think that Capta Creus will handle the stretch out in distance. And if she runs back to that performance against Mean Mary 3 back, I think she's in with a shot.
Yeah, she's actually the horse I had third on my list if we were given 1, 2, 3 selections. The only thing I'll add is if there's one horse that I'm against in here, it's Elizabeth Way, who we talked about earlier. Not that I think she's a bad horse. Obviously, she won a grade 3 last time, but I think she had things just her own way, even more so than Mean Mary did. She set a slow pace that day in the very one, and I just think she's kind of in a bad spot. She either goes after Mean Mary and probably dooms both of them to defeat, or she lets Mean Mary go and is not going to win from a different kind of style. So she's an interesting horse to look at because she came from way back at the shorter distance of a mile and a 16th to win. But at this mile and 3/8 distance, I just think she's in a really bad spot as the horse who is most likely going to have to pressure Mean Mary.
That race began the pick 5 at Gulfstream, the late pick 5, and the pick 4 kicks off with race 11, the Gulfstream Park Oaks, a grade 2 event going a mile and a 16th for the 3-year-old fillies. Technically a Kentucky Oaks prep, though I think there'll be many more of those in the coming months. The two major players in this race are the number 5, Spice is Nice, and the number 9, Tonal is Shape. Unsurprisingly, they're the two shortest prices on the morning line. They were the top 2 finishers in the Devona Dale last month. Do you think it really just comes down to these two, or did you see this as a more competitive race?
I think if You asked me who's the two most likely winners. It's clearly those two. But I actually do want to give Lake Avenue a shot in here. She wheels right back in 3 weeks off that disappointing trying the Gazelle, where at 4-5, she just wound up in a pretty nasty speed duel. We have all the fractions coded in red. I still don't know if she's a horse I'm willing to bet. It just depends on what kind of odds she's going to be. I have no knocks whatsoever on the top two, Tonalist Shape, who I was a bit against last time, but she kind of won me over. She showed a whole new level of speed with that 110 TimeformUS speed figure when she took that race over Spice is Nice. And, of those two, I would probably side with Tonalist Shape. I think she's a little more athletic than Spice is Nice. She showed that. Watching the replay, I think she basically won that race by running the turn better. And in this race, she's actually going to get 2 turns to run. I think she's just a smaller, more athletic horse. So of those two, I give her the edge. I think she's the most likely winner. It's not like Spice is Nice is getting a whole lot of extra distance. It is an extra 16th of a mile. But given the configuration of that Gulfstream course, it might actually work against her more than it will for her. If this race was 1 1/8 miles, I'd probably have a different opinion. But if I had to give a top pick, it would be Tonalist Shape. And I do think Lake Avenue has a puncher's chance as probably lone speed in here after getting caught in that speed duel last time.
Yeah, we're very much on the same page here. I feel like Spice is Nice could potentially even be favored again because she was such a heavy favorite last time, but I really do prefer Tonalist Shape. She's just won me over at this point. As you said, we've been skeptical of her in the past, but she's just one of these horses that shows up every time. She doesn't have some set in stone running style, so she really makes her own good trips. I don't think she's going to have any problem with the 2 turns. So I really do think Tonalist Shape is the horse to beat, though my top pick is the same horse that you highlighted as the interesting horse in this race. That's Lake Avenue. I know that the TimeformUS pace projector is predicting a fast pace here. In these 1.16 races at Gulfstream, I don't care so much about that. I'm more interested in the fact that Lake Avenue is shown on a clear lead because so often, especially horses that are drawn down towards the inside, if you've got speed from an inside post going 1.16 at Gulfstream, it does give you an edge because the others have to work harder to cross over, and basically you get to dictate terms at that point. So I think Joel Rosario is going to have a few more options than some others on Lake Avenue, assuming that she breaks well. It should be noted Lake Avenue did not break well last time when she had to rush up after a slow start in the Busher, but I agree with everything you said about her Busher. Just too fast of a pace. I also wonder if Bill Mott didn't really have her cranked that day because her work tab was pretty light coming into that race. I do think it's interesting that Bill Mott is running her back on such short rest now. To me, that's a sign of confidence, and I'm just going to try to get Lake Avenue to wire the field because she really did show ability as a 2-year-old.
Yeah, and I will say with that pace projector flag indicating it's a fast pace, I'm particularly, like you said, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it in these 1.16 races at Gulfstream because speed is such a weapon. And I also tend to downplay it a little bit when a horse is shown with such a clear lead as Lake Avenue has. If she breaks at all in here, she should be able to make the lead. So she is definitely going to be dangerous, in my opinion. I was a little leery at first when I saw that she was shipping back from New York, but as it was pointed out to me on Twitter, I'm sorry, I forget who it was. She's actually been stabled at Palmettos all winter. So it's not like she's in New York and now shipping down to the heat. So that kind of laid my worries there with that angle.
Next race at Gulfstream is race 12, the Pan American. This is one that I know we weren't going to spend a whole lot of time on because you've got a heavy favorite in this race, that being the number 9 Zulu Alpha. Just quickly for my money, I thought it was a 2-horse race. I wasn't going to concede it to Zulu Alpha. I thought Channel Cat was very interesting because he got a poor trip in the Pegasus World Cup turf last time. For any multi-race sequences, I'd be using those 2.
Yeah, we're in the same boat there. I actually covered this race on Out of the Gate if people want to hear my more deep thoughts on it. But I went with Channel Cat just because of the pace scenario. But I'm certainly not dismissing Zulu Alpha. I think he is the other one to beat, and I wouldn't go more than 2 deep here.
We'll spend a bit more time talking about the next race, also on the turf, going a mile. This is the Appleton Grade 3 event. There's a lot going on in this race, and I think many contenders to discuss. I guess we'll start with the morning line favorite. That's the number 10 Sambaye. He was the winner of the Canadian turf last time, and I thought Sambaye ran pretty well that day. That was a spot where Guido just ran off on the front end, and Sambaye was put in that unenviable position of having to chase a runoff leader, made the first move after him, still held off the closers. It was a good effort. Is he really good enough to beat this field? Because I think this is a tougher spot. I'm not quite sure, but he's also not the kind of horse I want to leave out.
No, that's a very deep race. When you see a horse like Sambaye as the morning line favorite, I mean, he's not the strongest horse in the world for a grade 3. He's probably just about a grade 3 horse. What I found interesting here, it's a full field of 12. We have 4 also eligibles, but there's still no fast pace notation on the TimeformUS pace projector. I think the race does have to start with El Tormenta. I think he is probably the horse to beat. He won the Woodbine Mile last year before trying the Breeders' Cup Mile unsuccessfully, of course. But he does come off a layoff since then. He draws a wide post, so I'm going to take a chance against him. And this is one of those races where I'm going to go for what's probably a crazy long shot, but that's a number 8, Dr. Edgar at 20-1. He's a horse who I think could be on a lone lead. The pace projector shows the same thing. He's got Paco Lopez riding, who we've talked about. I have no doubt he's going to be aggressive and try to get the lead. And just from a running line standpoint, if you look at his last 2 races, he really has dirtied up form where he was in races with just crazy fast paces. He wasn't able to be near the front, but I just think he's a horse who's run all his best races when he's right up on or near that early lead. And I think that's a spot he's going to find himself in here, and any return to those best races of his make him a really strong contender, particularly given the pace.
Yeah, I've got bad news for you. I don't think your crazy long shot is so crazy because I picked him too. I actually wrote the closer look for this race in the racing form, and I did it before seeing the morning line, and I kind of thought that Dr. Edgar would be about a 6 or 8 to 1 shot here because he does look pretty logical to me. For all the reasons you said, there's not a whole lot of pace in this race, and he is a horse that seems to do his best running when he can clear off to the front end, and it seems like Paco Lopez is going to get to do that here. And his last 2 races, I know it seems like he's gone off form. They're not as bad as they seem, because that Artie Schiller 2 back at Aqueduct, I think we talked about that race on the TimeformUS Forecast back a number of months ago. That was a race that featured so many speeds. Voodoo Song was in there. I think Guido was in there. I mean, they just went crazy on the front end that day. So he never had a chance in that spot after they drew the race. And then last time out, I know the pace doesn't look that fast based on the fractions, but the pace is color-coded red in the TimeformUS PPs. It did fall apart late. Aquaphobia, the winner, actually came back and ran surprisingly well in that really tough Muniz Memorial at Fairgrounds last week. So I don't think that race is as weak as some people might think it is. And Dr. Edgar, as you said, last year, he was in really good form. He's the defending Appleton champion. If he runs the kind of race he ran in this race last year, I think it's going to be really tough to run down. So he's my top pick in this race. Don't think we're getting a huge price, but he could still pay about $20. The others that I think we have...
The morning... Yeah, Gary, sorry about that. I was just going to say, I agree with you. He's not going to be 20-1, but I still think he's going to offer some value. Sorry to interrupt.
No. El Tormenta, who you mentioned, I kind of had a similar feeling. He is the class horse in this race. I just think he's got a number of things working against him, from the post position to the layoff to the fact that he's really done his best work around 1 turn in the past. Now he's got to get 2 turns from the outside post. I just think there are some obstacles there. I've got no problem with a horse like March to the Arch, who just consistently runs fast speed figures. He's a classy horse who's been competitive in some grade 1 races in the past. We'll see if he gets enough pace to close into, because he is a 1-run closer. But I think March to the Arch is the kind of horse that you do definitely want to use on your ticket somewhere.
Yeah, he's the other horse. I'm afraid we're almost 2 alike in this race, but hopefully it turns out to be a good thing.
Yeah, and just before we move on, the only other horse that I would consider using strongly is the number 7, Social Paranoia. He'll be a bigger price than his uncoupled stablemate Sambaye. Social Paranoia is just a horse who is going from 3 to 4, so he's got a right to just improve with natural maturity. And he's also a horse that I think might appreciate turning back to a mile, because they tried going some longer distances like 10 furlongs last year. I think a little bit shorter could be better for him.
No doubt. All right, let's get on to the big one now. Yeah, I was starting there because I'm actually going to do something different and give you a chance to go first for a change. I kind of always get the chance to steal your opinions or whatever. So let's hear what you have to say on this one, and then I'll go.
All right, so I don't have anything too clever in this race. I don't have a big knock against Tis the Law, other than the fact that he's probably going to be in about the even money range because he's justifiably the leader of this division right now, at least on the East Coast. He's shown the most of these horses. I don't think he's going to have a big problem stretching out to a mile and an eighth. I've been a fan of this horse. I think he's going to run well, but I think I have to take a shot against him with the number 9, Independence Hall. As you know, this is a horse that I've been a big fan of all along, ever since his Nashua. I think if he gets back to that kind of performance, he's going to be tough for even Tis the Law to beat. The real question with Independence Hall is, has he been the same horse as a 3-year-old? Well, I could excuse his Jerome because he acted up so badly in the paddock that day, and that wasn't a race that he was probably fully cranked for. And then last time in the Sam F. Davis, I know we have a bit of a difference opinion about this. The pace, it's not color-coded as being exceptionally fast in the TimeformUS PPs, but from a race flow standpoint, I thought that the speeds were up against it that day. The 2 horses that were dueling for the lead finished absolutely nowhere, and Independence Hall was put in that position where he had to chase those horses down, make that first move after the leaders, probably get to the front earlier than Jose Ortiz really wanted to, and was run down late by Sol Volante. He's going to have to run faster than that 111 TimeformUS speed figure to step up and beat horses like Tis the Law and Ete Indian. I just feel like there's more to this horse than what we've seen so far this year. And more than anything, I'm hoping he gets back to that Nashua performance because I just want to see him do it.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to. We definitely do have a difference of opinion. I'm against him. I'll say it's a full field of 12. So as usual, not always, as we talked about, the pace projector thinks the pace is going to be fast. But again, it's a situation where we show a horse on the clear lead, and that's Ete Indian. He draws the far outside post, so I'm not sure if it's going to be as easy as the pace projector makes it sound. When you have this kind of purse, it's not all that often, especially on dirt where horses are just handed the early lead. But I do think he's an awful talented horse, and I think the race comes down to him and Tis the Law, the obvious favorite in here. The couple that people may be tempted to take a shot against with, while I respect your argument on Independence Hall, I take the other side of it. Ever since his Nashua, he just hasn't looked like the same horse to me. Maybe I'd have been a little more impressed if Sol Volante had come back and run better in the Tampa Bay Derby. He ran okay, but he basically ran the same speed figure he did when in the Davis. I think he ran a 112 that day. So surprisingly enough, no other horses from that field have run back. Ajaweed's in this race from that race, so there's not a whole lot more to go on. But I'm going to be against him. The other horse is Gouverneur Morris. He's probably going to draw some attention at the windows. I'm a little more optimistic on this one than I am Independence Hall. The horse he beat, Untitled, came back to run a good second in the Gotham, but I'm not sure he can close the gap to the top 2. It is a pretty big gap. So among those 2, I have no problems with Tis the Law other than the price, as you do. I have no knocks on him. It's still clear in my head watching him easily beat Ete Indian last time. I just have a feeling that at a mile and an eighth, if there's any kind of the odds discrepancy as the morning line shows, Ete Indian's like 3.5 times the price of Tis the Law. Speed is always dangerous at this distance at Gulfstream. I do think he can make the lead. So for me, it comes down to those 2, and just on a price basis, I'm going to go with Ete Indian.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm not against any of these horses. I just want to see them all do well, these top 3, Tis the Law, Ete Indian, and Independence Hall, because I do think they've all shown exceptional ability at different points. The one thing I'll say about Ete Indian is that I do think people might overrate him a little bit off that Fountain of Youth performance, because the big favorite in that race was Dennis's Moment, and Dennis's Moment, just for whatever reason, didn't show up, finished last. And once you took Dennis's Moment out of that race, the Fountain of Youth was just significantly weaker than this from a quality standpoint. I mean, look at who was second, Candy Tycoon. He's just not really a contender in this race from my standpoint. So I do respect Ete Indian, and I thought he even ran well too back in the Holy Bull. I just wonder, like you, if he's going to be able to clear from the outside once again, handle the bit of the extra distance. Again, I think he's going to run well. He was just the one that I preferred slightly less than the other two. Like you, though, I wasn't that interested in anybody else. Gouverneur Morris, to me, he does have upside. I think he's going to have to run faster to compete against these, though, and he's not really proven against this caliber of competition. So for me, I thought he was going to be maybe a little overbet in this race. I'm just hoping that Independence all bounces back and he's in the 4 to 5 to 1 range. I'd want that kind of price on him. I wouldn't want shorter than that because that would be an underlay.
Yeah, the thing with Andy, and for me, I'm going to take the side that he kind of ran the field off their feet. As seen on TV, who's in this field was fairly close up to him and just couldn't keep up and really spit the bid. I know that horse has some distance questions about him. And, I'm not sure what they're going to try to do with him in here, but it won't surprise me if any of the three we talked about win, and even Gouverneur Morris. Anybody else would be a shock to me. And I'll just end by saying I'm really glad we have racing for at least another big weekend. Hopefully there's a few more to come. We still have Oak on. We still have Santa Anita running these days. So hopefully we'll have some more shows. And I'm going to enjoy Saturday as much as I possibly can. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly echo that sentiment. I've got to say it was a nice distraction these past couple of days to be handicapping this Gulfstream card because there was so much to dive into and it really occupied all of your brain power, which I think we need at this point in time. So hopefully racing is able to continue somewhere for the next few weeks. But for the foreseeable future, we'll definitely be back on Tuesday on the TimeformUS Pacecast to discuss all of these races in great detail because I imagine there'll be a lot to talk about. Remember that, as always, you can listen to these podcasts, the TimeformUS Forecast and the TimeformUS Pacecast on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back again on Tuesday.